Picture this scene. It is the night of the Passover Seder. The table is set beautifully, Haggadot at each place setting, and a pillow on every chair. The family begins the Seder and proceeds with the traditional readings and songs. They have dipped their karpas and eaten the bitter herbs and Hillel sandwich. The gefilte fish and matzo ball soup are served, and silence. Nobody says a word. The small slurps of chicken broth are all that can be heard. Cousin Fred looks at Aunt Jenny, begins to open his mouth, and stops. Grandpa Max looks pleadingly at Grandma Sylvia, but she quickly stands up to check on the brisket. Your niece rolls her eyes as Sarah reaches for the salt right in front of her. Finally, a small voice is heard. It is 4-year-old Noah. Why isn't anyone talking? His big sister responds, Mommy says there is a rule at the Seder. No talking politics. Last spring, the JTA, the Jewish Telegraph Agency, published a guide titled, Worried About Trump Talk Ruining Your Seder? Here's how to get through it. Now, despite the flippant title, it was actually a serious piece of advice about how to create a Seder that is welcoming and safe for all. But it leaves me wondering, how did we come to a point that we would need such a thing? Have you noticed this too in your families or your circles of friends? People who disagree, be it politically, religiously, culturally, are having a very hard time coexisting. Raise the topic of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict at dinner? No, I'd rather not. The BC homes tax? Let's agree to disagree. The pipeline? I don't really want to get into it. And with such discomfort comes avoidance. Last week, there was some controversy in the news when the esteemed New Yorker magazine invited and then disinvited Steve Bannon to their Ideas Festival. To the organizers' credit, they wanted to provide a space for ideas, even controversial ones, to be publicly debated and disputed. But for many of the participants, sharing a stage with someone with offensive ideas was unconscionable. The New Yorker rescinded the invitation. In today's hypersensitive world, what is the Jewish response when the polarization of ideas causes us to spend less and less time in shared spaces? What we seem to need is a collective shot of Derech Eretz, meaning good manners and decency. To be clear, I'm not talking about moral equivalency. There are ideas that are offensive and wrong and must never be tolerated or rationalized. What I do mean to focus upon is our civil discourse, how we engage with one another in the shared spaces of our lives, both public and private. I was fortunate this summer to spend 10 days taking part in the Rabbinic Torah Study Seminar at the Hartman Institute in Jerusalem. It was the first time I had the honor to study at this prestigious institute with 140 rabbis of different movements from all over the world. Many of us refer to the Hartman Seminar as Rabbi Camp. This summer's theme was Derech Eretz, and we explored biblical, rabbinic, Hasidic, and modern texts to understand how the wisdom of our past can help us deal with the social dysfunction that we are experiencing in our world today. A well-known statement from our tradition is, Derech Eretz kadma laTorah. Decency must precede Torah. Decency is so fundamental to Judaism that without it, there would be nothing upon which Torah can stand. I fear that our discourse today is so absent of Derech Eretz that it is bringing us into uncharted territory of incivility. Our social media culture is an extreme example of this danger. How quickly does the comment section of an article, a Facebook post, or a Twitter thread turn into a minefield of toxicity? An analysis of Canada's online behavior commissioned last year by the CBC suggests that from 2016 to 2017, there was a 600% increase in how often Canadians use language online that is racist, Islamophobic, sexist, or otherwise intolerant. I believe that most of us do not seek to reject the humanity of those with whom we disagree. For the large majority of us, the harder question is, what do we do when we find ourselves face to face with an idea that we find offensive? Do I have an obligation to speak up when I hear something foolish? Is it upon me to correct or rebuke the statement? Or is it better to stay out of it and not be associated with ugly ideas? In that situation, do I owe them the civility of engagement? We are not the first generation to struggle with this question. There is a tension in the wisdom of the book of Proverbs, in which King Solomon gives contradictory advice to answer this question: should you engage with the fool? First, Solomon says, do not answer a fool according to his folly, lest you become like him. Don't engage the fool if his foolishness will rub off on you by reputation or belief. Yet in the very next verse, the king advises, answer a fool according to his folly, lest he think himself wise. You must engage the fool, because if you do not, he will never change his ways. One of my teachers at Hartman was Dr. Christine Hayes, a professor of rabbinic literature at Yale. She gave an incredible lecture on this topic of Derech Eretz that actually ended with a standing ovation from all of the rabbis. Professor Hayes' talk was an attempt to resolve this question from Proverbs in all of its modern relevance. In our own time, must we engage with the fool? She focused on a classical story in the Talmud that exemplifies this tension. Maybe you've heard this story or part of it before. It regards two rabbis who often disagreed on approaches to Jewish law, Rabbi Hillel and Rabbi Shammai. They disagreed on everything, from the order in which to light the Hanukkah menorah to how to hang a mezuzah, vertical or horizontal. On that topic, they compromise, which is why our mezuzot hang diagonally today. Here in our Talmudic story, in three separate situations, a Gentile comes before these two rabbis and demands the rabbi convert him to Judaism. In the first scenario, the Gentile requests that he be converted on the basis of the written Torah, but without any connection to the Mishnah, or the oral Torah of the rabbinic tradition. Rabbi Shammai scolds him and casts him away. Rabbi Hillel converts him and slowly begins to show him the letters of the Aleph Bet. The second scenario is one of the most famous narratives of the entire Talmud. Here, a Gentile approaches Shammai and demands to be taught the entire Torah while standing on one foot. Shammai pushes him away with a stick. Hillel, on the other hand, converts him and then teaches that what is hateful to you, do not do to another. That is the entire Torah. All the rest is commentary. Go and study. Finally, in the third scenario, a Gentile overhears a discussion coming from the synagogue about the majestic garments worn by the high priest. He goes before Shammai to request conversion so that he too can become a high priest and wear the fancy vestments. Shammai pushes him away with his stick, just as he had with the previous two. The Gentile approaches Rabbi Hillel with the same request, and Hillel converts him on the spot, and then encourages him to engage in Torah study, to learn the protocols of the priesthood. He does, and realizes that he is not well suited, after all, to become a high priest. The Talmud continues, "Eventually, the three converts gathered together in one place and said this: Shammai's impatience sought to drive us from the world. Hillel's patience brought us beneath the wings of the divine presence." The rabbis teach us that one should engage the fool when important matters are at stake. Torah matters. We are very good at being like Shammai, closing the door, blocking out those with opinions different from our own, preferring to live in comfortable spaces with people who think just like we do. But there is too much at stake right now in our world to think that we can move forward into a shared future by ignoring each other and living in a bubble. This is not how we grow and bring progress to the world. We must allow ourselves more opportunities to be a Hillel. I want to share the story of a modern Hillel who took a chance to give space to someone who held toxic ideas. You may have encountered the story in the news, the story of Derech Black, a young man who was a one-time protege of the KKK leader David Duke. Derech, whose father started the neo-Nazi website Stormfront, was assumed to be the heir apparent to the white nationalist movement. When he was at university in Florida, he hid his hateful identity from the other students. But eventually, he was outed, and many on campus acted like Shammai and pushed him away. Derech became a campus pariah. After thinking about it for a while, a fellow student named Matthew Stevenson, the only Shabbat-observant Jew on campus, decided he might be able to change Derech's ideology and invited him to the Shabbat dinners he hosted in his apartment each week. Maybe he'd never spent time with a Jewish person before, recalled Matthew. Derech, who had not received any invitation to a social outing following his outing on campus, accepted. Derech attended Shabbat dinners with Matthew for 2 years, and his new friends began to nudge him to leave behind the white nationalist ideology that he believed in until then. With their encouragement, he began to slowly deconstruct the intellectual arguments for racism and to take classes on topics like Judaism and Islamic civilization. He stopped posting on Stormfront. He left his radio show. In 2013, he wrote a letter to the Southern Poverty Law Center, renouncing his former beliefs. He said, "I acknowledge that things I have said, as well as my actions, have been harmful to people of color, people of Jewish descent, activists striving for opportunity and fairness for all." Last year, after the white supremacist rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, he was asked in an interview to reflect on his decision to speak out. He said this: "What I really wanted to do was just leave, never say anything again, disappear off the face of the earth and pretend that I didn't know anything about white nationalism. And it was a few more tough conversations that convinced me that wasn't enough, because I'd actually done harm." Matthew provided just what Derech needed to change by meeting him right where he was. I wonder myself if I would have been able to do the same. Matthew showed the world what it means to be capable of being a Hillel. As my professor, Christine Hayes, taught, would that we all find someone to believe in our moment of utter folly that we are not incorrigible, someone who will answer our folly with civility and respect, to meet us where we are and to accompany us on our path to a better place. During these days of awe, we teach that the Holy One of blessing holds the gates of tshuva, of repentance and turning, wide open for our prayers and our self-accounting. May we ourselves also be capable of engaging in Derech Eretz, to open those gates for others and to step inside when someone holds open that door of tshuva for us. Shana Tova.